The dust of the old ranch road clung to Elias Vance's boots, a fine, gritty layer that had settled into the worn leather over decades. He'd driven this path countless times, a solitary figure navigating a world that often felt as parched and unforgiving as the land he worked. Today, the purpose was simple: a new mare, strong and swift, to replace the one lost to the harsh winter. Elias, a man whose face was a roadmap of sun-baked lines and unspoken sorrows, knew the value of a good horse. He also knew the cost of everything, though some prices, he was learning, were not measured in coin. As his weathered pickup rumbled down the rutted lane toward Jedediah's ramshackle barn, a peculiar stillness hung in the air, a premonition that settled deep in his gut like a cold stone. Jedediah, a man known more for his shrewdness than his honesty, had advertised a promising colt, but a gut feeling, honed by years of living by instinct, whispered of something else entirely. The sun beat down, relentless, baking the dry earth, and the scent of stale hay and something else, something metallic and faintly acrid, drifted on the sparse breeze. He pulled the truck to a stop, the engine coughing to silence, and the quiet descended, broken only by the buzzing of flies. This wasn't just a horse trade. The air thrummed with a different kind of tension, a silent alarm bell that only the truly solitary could hear. The barn doors, warped and sagging, stood slightly ajar, inviting him into the cool, shadowed interior, a deceptive invitation that promised more than just the scent of livestock. Before we get into this tale, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And subscribe if you want more content like this one. Stepping into the dimness of the barn, Elias's eyes adjusted slowly, picking out the familiar shapes of stalls and forgotten equipment. He walked with a deliberate, unhurried pace, his boots crunching softly on the scattered hay, a man accustomed to shadows and the secrets they kept. The air here was heavy, not just with dust and animal musk, but with a palpable sense of fear, a silent scream hanging in the stagnant heat. He saw the colt first, a fine, spirited creature, pawing at the dirt in its stall, its eyes bright with untamed energy. But it wasn't the horse that pulled his gaze. From the corner of his eye, movement, a subtle shift in the deeper shadows of the adjacent stall. Beyond the colt's view, a muffled sound, barely a whisper, yet it cut through the silence like a razor. Elias paused, his hand instinctively going to the worn leather of his belt, where no weapon rested, only the phantom weight of one long absent. He moved closer, his breath held, his eyes scanning the gloom, and then he saw her. A woman, bound, gagged, hidden behind a stack of hay bales, her eyes wide with terror, reflecting the scant light filtering through the cracks in the barn wall. Her skin, dark against the faded fabric of her dress, seemed to absorb the light, drawing him in. A knot tightened in Elias's stomach, cold and hard. This wasn't a horse trade. This was a nightmare given form, a living testament to the darkness that lurked just beneath the veneer of ordinary life. His first thought was of Jedediah, the crooked seller, but deeper, more primal instincts stirred within him. The instinct to flee, the instinct to help. A tremor ran through him, a realization that the ease of his morning had shattered, replaced by a profound and unsettling choice. His reputation, his solitude, his carefully constructed life, all hung in a delicate balance. The terror in her eyes was a raw, visceral thing, echoing a fear Elias had seen only once before. In a child caught in a burning barn, it was a fear that stripped away pretense, leaving only the stark, desperate struggle for survival. He felt the cold shock of it, a jolt that momentarily paralyzed him, but then, a strange, almost foreign impulse stirred within his hardened core. Not heroism, not pity, but a recognition of shared vulnerability, a sudden, blinding awareness of the fragile thread that held human lives together. His gaze flickered from her bound wrists to the heavy rope securing her ankles, then to the crude gag that silenced her cries. The stillness around them seemed to vibrate with the tension, the unspoken question hanging in the air. What now? His mind, usually a fortress of practicality and self-preservation, spun with a bewildering array of possibilities, each fraught with peril. He could turn away, pretend he saw nothing, buy the horse and leave, letting the darkness consume her. It was the easy path, The safe path. The path most men would take in this brutal world. He could claim ignorance, feign surprise, even alert the authorities. But what would that truly mean for her? More questions, more suffering, another layer of oppression. He knew the way the world worked. The unspoken rules that governed the fates of those deemed lesser. The injustice burned. A quiet, insistent flame in his chest. His hands, calloused and strong, twitched with an unbidden desire to sever the ropes, to tear away the gag, to extinguish that fear. But what then? A woman, an escaped prisoner, a burden, a threat to his solitary existence. The risk was immense, the consequences potentially ruinous. He wasn't a savior. He was just Elias Vance, a rancher trying to make ends meet. A man who had long ago shed the idealism of youth for the cold pragmatism of survival. Yet, looking into her eyes, he felt something shift within him. A subtle crack in the emotional armor he had worn for so long. A decision, made in a breath, swift and silent as a predator's strike. Elias moved, not with a flourish of heroic intent, but with the quiet efficiency of a man who knew how to untangle knots. His hands, surprisingly gentle for their size, went straight to the gag, untying the coarse fabric with a practiced ease, his fingers brushing against her trembling jaw. Her first breath was a ragged gasp, a soft sound of raw, unarticulated relief that was more eloquent than any plea. Her eyes, still wide with a primal fear, held a new, fragile spark of something akin to hope. He worked quickly, his gaze sweeping the barn, listening for the telltale sounds of Jedediah's approach. The ropes binding her wrists were thick, chafing her skin, but Elias found the knot, stiff with disuse, and with a grunt of effort, began to loosen it. Each tug, each pull, was a deliberate act of defiance against the silent injustice that had placed her there. She watched him, her breathing shallow, her body rigid with tension, as if any sudden movement might shatter this precarious moment of liberation. He felt the heat radiating from her skin, the tremor of her muscles, a testament to the long hours she must have spent in the cold, dark confines of the stall. The air was thick with the scent of fear and the promise of impending danger. He imagined Jedediah's heavy footsteps, his booming voice, the inevitable confrontation that would follow this act of quiet rebellion. The thought spurred him, lending urgency to his movements. The ankle ropes proved more stubborn, but he persisted, his jaw clenched, the soft hiss of rope against rope filling the air like a forbidden whisper. When she was finally free, she didn't move, her limbs stiff and unresponsive, her gaze still fixed on him, a silent question. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice a low rumble, rough from disuse, a stark contrast to the whispered terror that had filled the space moments before. Her attempt to stand was a testament to the agony she had endured, a slow, painful unfolding of limbs that had been bound for too long. She swayed, her knees threatening to buckle, and Elias, without conscious thought, reached out a steadying hand, his fingers brushing her arm. Her skin was cool, almost clammy, and she flinched at the touch, a reflex born of prolonged fear. He pulled her gently forward, guiding her out of the narrow confines of the stall, into the slightly less oppressive space of the main barn floor. Every sound seemed amplified, the rustle of straw beneath their feet, the distant caw of a crow, the frantic beat of his own heart. The air felt thin, sharp with the lingering scent of her fear and the metallic tang of something else, something he couldn't quite place. He glanced at the colt, still restless in its stall, its innocent gaze, a stark contrast to the darkness that had unfolded in the adjacent space. Jedediah was still nowhere to be seen, a stroke of fortune that felt too good to be true. Elias knew this reprieve was fleeting, a fragile bubble that could burst at any moment. He had to get her out, not just out of the barn, but away from this place entirely. "My truck," he murmured, his voice low, a command more than an invitation. "Can you make it?" She nodded, a subtle movement, her eyes darting toward the open barn doors, a silent, desperate plea for escape. He moved first, cautiously, peering out into the blinding sunlight, scanning the yard for any sign of life. The oppressive quiet persisted, a tension that stretched his nerves taut. The distant hum of a vehicle, a sound he recognized, pierced the silence, growing louder by the second. Jedediah. There was no time to spare. He turned, urging her forward with a slight, insistent pressure on her back, guiding her towards the sliver of freedom that lay just beyond the barn doors, the sun-drenched road waiting like a narrow, perilous path. The truck, a beacon of escape in the oppressive heat, felt miles away, though it stood only a few dozen yards from the barn doors. Each step was a precarious negotiation of fear and physical strain. The woman, still wobbly, leaned heavily on Elias's arm, her breathing shallow and ragged, a silent testament to the ordeal she had endured. The sun beat down, a relentless anvil, pounding on their exposed heads, turning the dust into a shimmering haze that danced before their eyes. The hum of Jedediah's approaching vehicle grew louder, transforming from a distant drone to the unmistakable roar of an old engine straining up the lane. Panic, a cold, sharp claw, began to scratch at Elias's throat. He quickened his pace, almost dragging her, his gaze darting between the approaching dust cloud and the woman beside him. He could see the fear etched deeper into her face now, a desperate, animalistic terror that mirrored his own mounting anxiety. He fumbled for the truck keys, his fingers suddenly clumsy, the metal cold and alien in his palm. The passenger door creaked open, a sound that seemed to echo across the silent yard, and he urged her inside, pushing her gently onto the cracked vinyl seat. Her body, stiff and unresponsive, seemed to fold into the space, her eyes still wide, fixed on the approaching cloud of dust. He slammed the door shut, the sound a blunt punctuation mark against the growing clamor. He scrambled around to the driver's side, his heart thumping against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of impending confrontation. Jedediah's truck was now clearly visible, a dark, menacing shape hurtling towards them. Elias slid behind the wheel, jamming the key into the ignition, his hands shaking as he turned it. The engine sputtered, caught, and then roared to life, a rough, mechanical groan that promised salvation. He slammed the gear into reverse, twisting the wheel, the tires spitting gravel as the truck lurched backward, beginning its desperate turn. As the truck wheeled around, kicking up a thick cloud of dust, Jedediah's dilapidated pickup screeched to a halt in the yard, its ancient engine sputtering indignantly. Jedediah himself, a hulking figure with a face like a pitted rock, emerged from the cab, his eyes narrowing, his mouth contorting into a snarl as he took in the scene. Elias, his truck pointed away from the barn, a silent, dark-skinned figure slumped in the passenger seat. "Vance, what in hell you doing with my property?" Jedediah's voice, a gravelly roar, cut through the oppressive quiet of the afternoon. Elias felt a cold dread creep up his spine, but he kept his gaze steady, his foot pressing down on the accelerator. He offered no explanation, no apology, only a silent defiance. The tires spun, then bit into the loose earth, and the truck lurched forward, gaining speed. Jedediah cursed, a string of profanities that painted the air thick with rage, and then he was moving, a lumbering, surprising burst of speed, heading for the barn, undoubtedly to confirm his suspicions. Elias didn't look back. His focus was solely on the road, on getting away, on the woman beside him whose fragile life now rested in his hands. The truck bumped and swayed over the uneven terrain, the rhythmic jarring a harsh reminder of their precarious situation. She remained silent, her body tense, her gaze fixed on the receding landscape, as if expecting the ground to open up and swallow them whole. He stole a glance at her, her face still etched with fear, but now, a flicker of something else. Exhaustion, perhaps, or a deep, almost spiritual weariness. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful, deceptive backdrop to their desperate flight. The silence in the cab was heavy, laden with unspoken questions, with the weight of choices made in haste, with the chilling reality of what might lie ahead. The journey back to Elias's ranch was a long, silent vigil, punctuated by the groan of the old truck and the distant hum of the world they were leaving behind. The woman, whose name he still didn't know, remained a figure of profound silence, her presence a heavy, undeniable weight in the small cab. He caught glimpses of her in the rearview mirror, her dark skin luminous in the fading light, her eyes, wide and luminous, reflecting the passing landscape like still pools. She barely moved, a statue carved from terror and resilience. And Elias found himself wondering with a growing unease about the stories hidden within her stillness. What unspeakable cruelty had brought her to Jedediah's barn? What chains, visible and invisible, still bound her? He, a man accustomed to the solitary rhythm of his life, suddenly felt the profound burden of another's fate intertwined with his own. He was not a man given to introspection, but the silence forced it upon him. Why had he done it? Was it a fleeting impulse of decency? A defiance against the casual cruelty he witnessed in the world? Or something deeper, a yearning for redemption he hadn't known he possessed? His own past was a tangle of harsh choices, of survival at any cost, a landscape scarred by losses and regrets. He had built his life on isolation, brick by brick, against the very currents of human connection. And yet, here she was, a stranger, a witness, a mirror reflecting a part of himself he had long suppressed. The road stretched endlessly before them, a ribbon of dust and possibility, leading them deeper into the embrace of the twilight, towards an uncertain future where their paths would now inevitably collide, a collision of two solitary souls, brought together by an act of unexpected defiance in the heart of a merciless world. As the truck finally pulled into the familiar, isolated yard of Elias's ranch, the last vestiges of twilight clung to the horizon, painting the sky in deep indigo. The stillness here was different from Jedediah's barn. It was a profound, almost spiritual quiet, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the soft sigh of the wind through the sparse trees. Elias killed the engine, and the silence descended, heavy and expectant. He looked at the woman beside him, her silhouette stark against the fading light. She hadn't spoken a word since he'd freed her, her silence a profound, unsettling thing, a testament to a trauma too deep for words. "We're here," he said, his voice rough, cutting through the quiet. She shifted, slowly, as if waking from a long, troubled sleep, her eyes still wide, searching the unfamiliar surroundings. He felt a strange mixture of apprehension and a reluctant sense of responsibility. What now? He had plucked her from one cage, only to bring her to another, albeit a far more spacious and less brutal one. He dismounted, walking around to open her door, a gesture of quiet courtesy he hadn't performed for anyone in years. She emerged slowly, her limbs still stiff, her gaze sweeping over the modest ranch house, the barn, the corrals, her eyes betraying a cautious hope mingled with a lingering fear. "There's a cot in the shed, for now," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, masking the uncertainty that gnawed at him. "Food, water." He gestured vaguely towards the small, weathered structure near the main barn. It was not an offer of comfort, but a statement of pragmatic necessity. The transaction of salvation had taken place. Now came the aftermath, the awkward negotiation of two profoundly damaged souls sharing a fragile, unspoken space. He watched her, a silent observer of her hesitant movements, her obvious exhaustion. The burden of her presence, once a sharp jolt of terror, had begun to settle into a dull, insistent ache in his chest, a constant reminder of the profound disruption she represented to his carefully constructed solitude. The shed, though small and filled with the scent of old leather and dust, offered a degree of shelter she hadn't known in days. Elias brought her water, a tin cup cool against her trembling hands, and a plate of cold, hard biscuits. He did not ask her name, nor did she offer it. Their communication remained a symphony of silence, punctuated by the rustle of his movements and the soft, almost inaudible sounds of her breathing. He watched her from the doorway for a moment, a silhouette against the dim light, and then he left, leaving her to the quiet solitude of her temporary refuge. As the night deepened, Elias found himself wrestling with ghosts he thought he had long buried. Her presence in his shed, a silent, potent force, unearthed memories of his own past, of a world where justice was a luxury few could afford, and mercy, a rare, dangerous commodity. He saw the flash of an old fire, the echo of desperate cries, a young boy's face etched with a fear that mirrored her own. Flashback. Asterisk. A small hand in his, tugging him away from the blaze, the acrid smell of smoke thick in his nostrils, the frantic, unspoken fear of being left utterly alone. He had been a boy once, too, full of raw, unchanneled emotion, before the world had slowly, systematically hardened him into the man he was now. He paced the worn floorboards of his house, a restless phantom in the darkness. The sounds of the night outside amplifying the questions that hammered in his mind. Who was she? What was her story? And what had he truly unleashed by his impulsive act of defiance? The risk was undeniable. Jedediah would not let this go. There would be consequences, far-reaching and potentially devastating. He was a man who lived by a strict code of self-preservation, a solitary wolf in a land that tolerated no weakness. But in her eyes, in her silent terror, he had seen something that resonated deeply within him, a flicker of shared humanity that transcended the harsh realities of their world. He found himself thinking of her, not as a burden, but as a silent plea, a testament to a truth he had tried to deny, that even in the most desolate landscapes, the human spirit, fragile as it was, could still ignite a spark of unexpected hope. The next morning, the sun rose, a merciless eye in a cloudless sky, casting long, stark shadows across the ranch. Elias went to the shed, his steps heavy with the weight of an approaching decision. He found her awake, sitting on the cot, her eyes fixed on the sliver of light filtering through the crack in the door. She looked less terrified, but the exhaustion was still etched deeply into her features. He brought her more water, a piece of dried meat, and then, without preamble, he asked the question that had hung unspoken between them. "What's your name?" Her voice, when it came, was a low, rusty whisper, unused for too long. "Elara." It was a melodic sound, unexpected in its softness, and it settled into the quiet space between them, a fragile bridge between two strangers. He nodded, acknowledging the offering. He didn't press for more, knowing that stories, like wounds, healed on their own time. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that Jedediah would not be far behind. The man's pride, his reputation, his cruel business, all had been affronted. Elias knew the type, a predatory shadow lurking in the periphery of their brutal society. The threat was a tangible thing, a heavy cloud on the horizon. He walked the perimeter of his property, his eyes scanning the distant roads, his senses attuned to the slightest disturbance. He saw nothing, heard nothing, but the silence itself felt ominous, a prelude to the storm he knew was brewing. His solitude, once a fortress, now felt like a fragile cage, vulnerable to the outside world. He had pulled Elara from one kind of slavery, only to find himself entangled in a dangerous dance with her captors, a dance that promised pain and potentially a complete unraveling of the life he had so meticulously constructed. The morning wore on, the heat building, and with it, the tension, a slow, relentless tightening that promised a confrontation. It was mid-afternoon when the first rider appeared on the horizon, a lone silhouette against the shimmering heat haze, kicking up a plume of dust that stretched behind him like a spectral tail. Jedediah. Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his gut, a familiar thrum of adrenaline preparing him for the inevitable. He'd seen enough men like Jedediah to know that his fury would be as relentless as the desert sun. He made his way to the house, retrieving the old rifle from its hiding spot above the mantel, its familiar weight a grim comfort in his hand. It was an old model, rarely used, but its presence was a statement, a line drawn in the unforgiving sand. He loaded it with deliberate care, each click of the mechanism a solemn punctuation mark in the heavy silence. Elara was still in the shed, and he spared a moment to consider her, realizing the depth of the precarious situation he had dragged them both into. There was no escape, no easy path out of this. He would have to face this head-on, for both their sakes. The rider grew closer, resolving into the unmistakable figure of Jedediah, his face a mask of rage, his hat pulled low against the sun. Behind him, Elias could now discern two other figures, indistinct in the distance, but their presence magnified the threat. Not just Jedediah, but an escalation, a public display of power. This was not a negotiation. This was a reclamation, a brutal assertion of dominance. Elias took a deep breath, the dry air burning his lungs, and then stepped out onto the porch, rifle held loosely at his side, a silent, unyielding sentinel. The stage was set for a confrontation that would either solidify his isolation or shatter it entirely, forging a new, dangerous path forward. Jedediah reined in his horse a stone's throw from the porch, the animal's hooves kicking up dust as it snorted. Sensing the tension, his two companions, grim-faced and silent, positioned themselves to his flanks, their presence radiating a cold, calculated menace. "Vance," Jedediah snarled, his voice thick with a mixture of contempt and raw fury. "You got something of mine." Elias met his gaze, unflinching, his grip tightening almost imperceptibly on the rifle. "I got nothing of yours, Jedediah." His voice was low, devoid of inflection, a dangerous calm in the face of the brewing storm. The air crackled between them, thick with unspoken threats, with the history of unspoken injustices. Jedediah's eyes flickered towards the shed, a flicker of something predatory in their depths. "She's mine, bought and paid for. You interfere, you'll regret it." His words were not a warning, but a blunt declaration of intent, a reaffirmation of a brutal, unwritten law. Elias felt a surge of cold defiance, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself in decades. He had lived too long in the shadows, watched too many injustices unfold from a safe distance. This was different. This was on his land, under his roof. A direct affront to the quiet, hard-won peace he had cultivated. "She's no man's property," Elias stated, his voice now carrying a subtle, resonant power, a surprising weight that seemed to push back against Jedediah's bluster. It was a simple sentence, yet it carried the weight of a profound truth, a direct challenge to the very foundation of Jedediah's warped moral code. The two men stared at each other, the silence stretching taut, each syllable of Elias's statement hanging in the air, a declaration of war. The sun, a burning disk in the sky, seemed to pause, holding its breath, as if waiting to see which way the wind would blow. The tension was a palpable thing, a coiled serpent ready to strike. Jedediah's face, already flushed with anger, darkened further, a vein throbbing visibly in his temple. His companions shifted, their hands hovering near their own holstered weapons, a silent signal of escalation. "You got no right, Vance," Jedediah spat, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "This ain't your business. You're just a lone wolf. Ain't got no stake in this." Elias's eyes narrowed, reflecting the harsh sunlight, but his expression remained unreadable. He knew the truth of Jedediah's words. He was a lone wolf, and this wasn't his fight, not by any conventional measure, but something had shifted inside him, a fragile piece of his hardened heart finally cracking open. The silence stretched, pregnant with unspoken violence, the kind of silence that precedes a gunshot. He thought of Alara, huddled in the shed, her life hanging in this precarious balance. He thought of the terror in her eyes, the raw injustice of her situation. And then, a realization, clear and sharp as glass, cut through him. This was his business now. He had made it so. "Sometimes," Elias said, his voice surprisingly calm, each word deliberate, "a man's gotta make a choice. And sometimes that choice ain't about what's easy or what's safe." He slowly, deliberately raised the rifle, bringing it to his shoulder, the cold steel a stark contrast to the burning heat of the afternoon. He didn't aim it directly, but the gesture was unmistakable, a clear line drawn in the dusty earth. A gasp, a small, barely audible sound, came from the shed. Alara, her presence, her vulnerability, solidified his resolve. Jedediah's companions hesitated, their hands dropping from their weapons, a flicker of doubt in their eyes. They hadn't expected this. They had expected a weak, easily intimidated man, a solitary figure who would buckle under pressure. But Elias Vance, in that moment, was not the man they thought him to be. He was a force of quiet, unyielding will, standing against the tide. His decision made, the consequences be damned. The standoff hung in the searing air, a tableau of defiance against oppression. Jedediah, caught off guard by Elias's unexpected resolve, sputtered, his bravado momentarily deflated. His gaze flickered between Elias's unyielding eyes and the cold barrel of the rifle, a silent calculation unfolding in his hardened mind. His companions, sensing the shift in the dynamic, remained frozen, their confidence wavering. The weight of the moment, the sheer audacity of Elias's stand, seemed to press down on them all. It was an act of profound, quiet sacrifice, a man choosing to shatter his meticulously built solitude for the fragile, unspoken life of another. Elias felt a profound weariness settle into his bones, a deeper exhaustion than any physical labor could induce, yet beneath it, a strange sense of liberation. He had finally shed the burden of indifference. the heavy cloak of self-preservation that had defined his existence. This was his reckoning, the pivotal emotional climax of a life lived on the fringes. He saw Jedediah's lips twitch, a flicker of something akin to fear in his eyes, replaced quickly by a mask of contempt. "You'll regret this, Vance," Jedediah hissed, his voice lacking its earlier conviction, now laced with a frustrated impotence. "There ain't nowhere to hide from what's comin'." With a final furious glare, Jedediah spun his horse, digging his heels into its flanks. The two companions, sensing their leader's retreat, followed suit, their horses churning up dust as they wheeled away, galloping back down the road they had come, their menacing silhouettes shrinking into the distance. Elias watched them go, not with triumph, but with a quiet, hollow relief. The immediate threat had receded, but the echoes of Jedediah's words lingered, a grim promise of future retribution. He lowered the rifle, the weight of it suddenly immense in his hands. He had chosen, and the path ahead was clear, though fraught with danger. He turned to the shed, his gaze drawn to the dark opening where Ilara was hidden, a silent testament to the fragile hope he had fought for. His life had irrevocably changed, forever linked to hers, a silent pact forged in the harsh crucible of human cruelty and unexpected grace. The dust settled, slow and deliberate, a veil drawn over the recent confrontation. Elias stood on the porch, the rifle now resting against the wall, a symbol of a battle won, but not the war. The sun, finally conceding its reign, dipped below the horizon, painting the vast sky in hues of fiery orange and bruised purple, a poignant backdrop to the day's stark drama. He looked towards the shed, a quiet understanding passing between them, unspoken yet profoundly felt. Ilara emerged, her figure a faint shadow against the dimming light, her eyes, though still weary, holding a newfound depth, a quiet strength. The fear, though not entirely gone, had receded, replaced by a cautious curiosity, a dawning sense of possibility. Elias said nothing, simply opened the door to his house, a silent invitation, a gesture that transcended the brutality of their world. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped across the threshold into the unknown, into a space that was not a cage, not a hiding place, but a home. The flickering lamplight inside cast long shadows, softening the harsh lines of his weathered face, revealing a flicker of vulnerability he rarely showed. The past was a heavy shroud, one that neither of them could fully escape. But in that moment, under the vast, indifferent sky, a new path had opened. There would be trials, no doubt. The world was not kind to those who defied its cruel conventions, but in the quiet understanding that passed between them, in the shared space of a small, isolated ranch house, a fragile seed of hope had been planted. Elias Vance, the solitary rancher, had found something more than a horse in that barn. He had found a reason to reconnect with a humanity he thought he had lost, a reason to fight, not just for himself, but for a glimpse of redemption, a quiet testament to the enduring power of compassion in a dark and unforgiving land. The future remained unwritten, but for now, in the stillness of the encroaching night, there was a fragile promise of peace, a quiet, hopeful resolution to a story that had begun in terror, but found its first breath of freedom in the most unexpected of places.